What's good? This is the 8bitdo Ultimate 2. It's the follow-up to the original Ultimate and also combines a lot of features from the Ultimate 2C. So let's see what 8bitdo's flagship controller now has to offer. If you like this kind of content, please feel free to like and sub. Just hit 100 subscribers and yeah, kind of on the road to 200, maybe even 1,000. That would be super awesome. Lots of support on my preview video. Please let me know if I missed anything in this video, if you're looking for any other kind of content, or yeah, just have any suggestions in general. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. So inside the box, it's looking a little bit light. So yeah, very streamlined. You've basically got some specs on the outside. Then you've got the charging dock, the cable, and the controller itself. So the dongle comes already inside of the charging stand, as you can see here, which is super convenient because you can just hook it up to your computer and you're already good to go. It's got a USB cable, unbraided, pretty plasticky. Not going to use that. And yeah, the controller itself. So one of the things that separates this from the 2C and what makes the Ultimate is really this charging dock. So as you can see here, you've got these 3 pins. And on the back of this, you've got these 3 connectors, and yeah, it just charges and connects automatically. On the 2C, there's no dots there. Kind of sit on there nicely, but yeah, you can't really do anything with it. So to get started with this controller, basically all you have to do out the box is plug this guy in, hit the home button, and you are good to go. It will connect automatically. You don't need the software yet. It will just know. Obviously, it's not plugged in, so it's blinking. It'll have these LEDs set to default. Obviously, you can tune these LEDs however you like. And yeah, you should download the software, basically get up and running with this. All right, so some of the tech specs, obviously it comes with this charging dock and it's got their TMR joysticks. I believe this one had Hall effect as well as the previous Ultimate, but this one had the better thumbsticks than the Ultimate. This one has TMR, so this is both better than the 2C and the previous Ultimate. It's also got these trigger locks back here. So yeah, you get the long click and you get the short click. I'll get into the feel a little bit later. It's also got gyro, so this is thumbstick emulating gyro. And it's also got these extra bumpers over here. So these extra bumpers weren't on the previous Ultimate, nor were the trigger locks. And on the 2C, it doesn't have trigger locks or back buttons, but it does have these. So basically the difference between this and the Ultimate is you're getting better joysticks, you're getting trigger locks, and you're getting these extra bumpers. The difference between the 2C is that you get the TMR joysticks, you get charging, you get trigger locks, and you get the back buttons. All right, so now I'm going to get into the look and feel of this controller, as well as doing a bit of a sound test. So yeah, this one I would say is very similar to the 2C in the components that are the same. So it's got those kind of tactile feel. It's got their newer version of the D-pad, which I think feels really great. It's really great if it's a main input or a secondary input. So it's got a little bit of mushiness, but it's also very clicky when you actually click the directions. So this guy's going to run you 60 USD, so I think 85 Canadian, which is what I got it for. And yeah, so for that, we're kind of putting this guy up against the stock Xbox and stock PlayStation, maybe even a little bit cheaper than those controllers. But yeah, so I wouldn't be comparing this to something like an Elite controller or like a custom controller. I would be comparing this more to what do you get out of one of the basic first-party controllers versus this. Obviously, this isn't going to work on Xbox or PlayStation, maybe with some adapters, but yeah, that's kind of like the pricing bracket that we're looking at. So yeah, a bit of a spoiler. I think this is, if you're on PC, it's kind of a no-brainer to get this over a first-party controller. It kind of kills it with features in every single way. So the look and feel, there's no rubber on the front. The front shell is just this plastic. It kind of feels like stock Xbox plastic. It's got a little bit of the stippling on the back. Like if this was a more expensive controller, I would probably expect some rubber on the front. Maybe it feels a little bit more premium. It's got a little bit of weight to it, but I wouldn't say it's all that heavy. But yeah, it does feel a little bit nicer than a first-party controller, or at least just on par with a first-party controller, but it's got some extra features. So something that you'd be missing on a first-party controller is something like those extra back buttons, the extra bumpers, and the trigger stops. And I think those are basically what makes this a kind of a pro controller at a basic controller price point. So yeah, it feels really good. Again, doesn't really work on console natively, so kind of keep this through the lens of that you're probably not going to be using this on console, but if you're a PC gamer, this one's for you. All right, so let's go through this controller component by component. So yeah, like I mentioned, they've got that mushy tactile D-pad that feels very good. We've got these start and select buttons that are pretty tactile as well. One thing I'll mention is that on this controller, I don't think they use any mechanical switches, but what 8bitdo does is they have these tactile switches that almost feel mechanical. Like, they're very satisfying to click, but I wouldn't call these mechanical, and I wouldn't call the trigger stops mechanical either, even though they do use kind of a button when they're clicked. So it's not like a software stop where it just kind of cuts the travel down. It actually does have a switch that you're clicking, but it definitely feels like a tactile switch. The face buttons use kind of a rubber membrane, but they're very stable. There really isn't that much wobble. Something I've noticed on the 2C though is you kind of do feel the legend a little bit, so you can kind of feel the X a little bit. It's the same scenario. You can tell that these are printed on. Not a big deal, just something to note. The bumpers are very tactile as well. The bumpers and the extra bumpers are very tactile. The triggers with the trigger stops feel similar, but they're definitely not as tactile. They still feel good. So yeah, kind of, you get that full press. Feels pretty good, pretty standard. This is basically what the original Ultimate had. And then you get that kind of tactile switch over here. See if you can hear that. Then we've got these back buttons. These also feel pretty tactile, so I'd say they feel pretty similar to the bumpers. Very clicky and tactile, feel really good. Everything feels really sturdy on this controller. It feels like they really put some good attention to QA on this. It feels really nice. And yeah, okay, so let's jump to the joysticks here. So I mentioned this in my kind of first impressions, but so let's compare it to the 2C real quick. So you can see that it has the metal shaft over here that goes against the anti-friction rings. Similar here, you get the metal shaft, but they're not really standard anti-friction rings. They've got that LED glow, and I think the LED looks like pretty good. You can turn it off if you want to save battery or you're not the biggest fan. But one thing that you're stuck with is these definitely don't feel as smooth as standard anti-friction rings. I know a lot of companies put the LEDs here, and while it can look cool, I personally would prefer to feel a little bit smoother. And another thing that they do is they have the same joystick cap on here that they use on the 2C. It's very, very slick around this area. It's got a little bit of texture here, and it's got that lip, so you do feel kind of stable, but anytime you're touching this middle area, it does feel pretty slick. So I do like to use the Skull & Co thumbstick caps just to get a little bit more grip on these guys and make it feel stable. All right, so I'm gonna do a bit of a sound test here. Extra bumpers, regular bumpers, triggers with trigger locks, face buttons, thumbsticks, D-pad, minus and plus, back buttons over here. That's it for the sound test. All right, so when you undock this controller, so this is hooked up to my main PC. The second you undock it, it's gonna automatically connect. It's very snappy, very responsive. You dock it back, it's going to dock, and then there's a little bit of an LED at the bottom there, just to kind of let you know it is charging. It does turn off after a while. And yeah, I think it's really neat that it does that. So one thing about the Bluetooth is how you connect with Android. So I tried to connect this to my PC with Bluetooth, and it did connect, but it wouldn't actually work. So unless I'm doing something wrong, I would consider this a Bluetooth controller for Android only. If you're on PC, just use the dongle, put it in, and yeah, if you want to switch between the modes back here, that's where that switch is. Just want to interject here a little bit about the difference between TMR and Hall effect sticks. So as far as I understand, TMR sticks use Hall technology, so it means it uses magnet as opposed to physical scratching discs in the center like potentiometers. But either way, the biggest difference is that TMR is a lower power function, and I believe they can be a little bit more accurate. It seems like the industry is moving away from standard Hall effect sticks to TMR. So yeah, just think about TMR as Hall effect for all intents and purposes. It's just the newer version. All right, so I did want to go through the 8bitdo product page a little bit. So yeah, you got the 3 initial colors here. I hope they do some more colors. Yeah, 8bitdo's already got that purple, so that's kind of neat. You can see it's an upgrade from their previous one. It's got the charging dock, like I mentioned, that automatically connects, which is really neat. It's got these TMR joysticks. Yeah, this definitely looks a lot grippier in the product picture than it actually is IRL. It's got the trigger mode that you can switch. They are Hall effect triggers. Hall effect for triggers is a little bit of a buzzword because even the stock Xbox controllers have Hall effect triggers. This is kind of the standard triggers if you have a controller that has different, so it's not an analog trigger where it's kind of on and off, then it's probably a Hall effect trigger. Yeah, it's got the customizable gyro. Again, this is thumbstick emulating gyro. It's not native. The extra bumpers, got their famous D-pad. Some people like it, some people don't. I really like it. It's got their 8-speed wireless. This basically just kind of converts to 1000 hertz polling rate wired and wireless. Yeah, like they mentioned here, compatibility. So Windows, this can be done through plugging it into Windows or plugging in the dock with the dongle. Android is going to be, they didn't actually test with the dongle, but maybe it works with the dongle, but this is what the Bluetooth mode is for, kind of the Android mode. And yeah, just showing off the dock and some other features, some of the RGB, which I will show or have shown, depending on where this clip shows up, in the software. Yeah, just a little bit more on the software and the mapping. Yeah, like I mentioned, this isn't as robust as something like the Cyclone 2 software or the FlyDigi software. It is pretty good, but yeah, it's not the most customizable. It doesn't have the most options there. And yeah, you can get a gaming clip if you want to use this for Android gaming. They're advertising it without the dongle, so I would assume that it just works with Bluetooth. And yeah, you can see here, this is really neat. There's a comparison to the previous Ultimate controller, and they are having a sale on the previous Ultimate. If you're definitely a casual gamer and you don't really care about all these extra features, I'm sure the previous Ultimate is a good buy. I haven't looked at the reviews in it in quite some time, so I would just double check the durability of it and how it's held up. But it does kind of use those earlier gen Hall effect joysticks, so that's probably the biggest downgrade there. And then yeah, just kind of a table going through the differences between all of them. So you can see that the compatibility with this one is just the 2 platforms. The previous one, yeah, had these as well. Oh yeah, so it actually shows it here. Bluetooth is only with Android, so yeah, just confirming that. And yeah, it just gets into the weight a little bit. So yeah, this feels pretty good. Just a standard controller. All right, so let's get into the use case for this. So 8bitdo sits in a little bit of an interesting spot where they kind of make these all-purpose controllers, I'd say. So they're great for emulation, great for retro, great for first party. But because they have these extra bumpers and the trigger locks, they do kind of start to bleed into that first-person shooter. And I think what makes this different from something that's a proper first-person shooter controller is 2 things. So the first of all, it's kind of the shape. So this kind of uses in between an Xbox and a Switch Pro controller shape, which is probably not for everyone. I think it feels pretty comfortable, but after really extended gaming sessions, I'd say I can feel it in my wrists a little bit. So I'd say this is probably, let's say, like in the 80 to 90% comfort. If we're rating the Xbox at 100%, I think the Xbox is kind of perfect ergonomics. And the second part that makes this a little bit different than an FPS-focused controller is the software. So you don't have as much customization, and I'll get into this in the software section, but you don't have as many features on this one as you do. And let's say something like the Cyclone 2, where it's really super customizable, you kind of have more basic things. And I'd say, yeah, that's what makes this more of a kind of all-rounder, multi-purpose controller. But if you really are only playing FPSs, I think there are better options here. But if this satisfies your needs, you really can't go wrong. You just should know it does have a little bit of shortcomings in the software department. But if you do find that this one's a little bit more comfortable for you than an Xbox controller and you're fine with the features, I don't see anything wrong with picking this one up. Like, this is going to do you just fine. If you are an esports player, I don't know, probably another option to consider is something that doesn't have turbo functions. I think that's actually one of the things that is holding back a lot of these Hall effect controllers and TMR controllers, is the fact that they do have turbo and keyboard mapping. I'm not sure how the rules work, but I would assume that's probably why these haven't caught on, sponsors aside and all that sort of stuff. All right, so let's take a look at this in Gamepad Tester here. So we're going to take a look at some of the dead zones in the triggers and in the thumbsticks. So let's start with the thumbsticks. If you can see over here, I'm not even really touching it all that much and the numbers are moving. So this is 0 dead zone, so there's no dead zone whatsoever. If I shake it, you can even see the numbers move. So yeah, I don't think there's any mechanical dead zones in this. If I even feather this just a little bit, I'm getting movement. So yeah, 0 dead zone means a true 0 dead zone in this case. So let's take a look at the circularity test over here. So you see, it's not really being clipped at all. Again, like I mentioned before, there isn't any way to change the type of circularity, so either raw or clipped in the software. So this is what you get, and I think, yeah, if you're going to get anything, this is a pretty good balance as well. So we're getting 6 in one, 8 in the other. These are all kind of good tolerances, so nothing to worry about there. So let's refresh, and we're going to take another look over here. So let's take a look at the triggers. So I did notice something in the triggers is that there is a little bit of a dead zone. I have this set to 0 dead zone, but in the software there isn't any. So let's take the left trigger here. So I'm going to start moving it a little bit. So there is a little bit of play, probably about this much play before you start to register any sort of input. Let's check the other one. So one thing to notice, this one's a little bit more sensitive, but you notice how before I put it in a lot before I got any sort of movement. So when you switch from the trigger locks to the trigger stops and back, the first time you press the trigger, there's going to be a little bit of the extra dead zone sometimes, or even when you turn on the controller. So this is just something to note. Like it's just the first trigger press. It kind of has to readjust, if you will. So that's just something in my unit. Let's take a look at it with the trigger locks. So a little bit of play and then get that full click. So about this much play and then the click. When you're actually using it, you don't really feel anything. It feels kind of immediate. And yeah, this is actually what I wanted to mention before about the tactile switch versus mechanical. So the Vader 3 Pro, and this pretty dusty, I haven't used it in a while, but this is a mechanical trigger stop. This is a tactile trigger stop. Tactile, mechanical. This one feels a little bit lighter. I think these trigger stops are great. I really like the FlyDigi trigger stops. They do a good job with that. But yeah, I just wanted to show the difference between tactile and mechanical. All right, so just zooming out here, you can see that I have all the mapping done. So I'm using the bumpers and I'm using the extra back buttons. This is something I mapped in the software. I mentioned this in my first impressions. I couldn't find a way to do it on the fly. I followed the instructions. I followed the same system that they do for this. This is super easy to map on the fly. Basically just press this and the button that you want to map, and then you press the mapping button or something like that. It's very simple. Did it through the software on this. I only set up one profile, so you see if I press the profile button, it goes back to 0. So there's no profile set for that one. Click it again, it goes to the profile. So we'll go through this in the software later, but yeah, it's basically an overview in Gamepad Tester, so feels pretty good. Like I mentioned, there are those kind of hard-coded dead zones for the triggers. Nothing super crazy, but the thumbsticks feel really accurate. There isn't really any play. It's not kind of sloppy. So you see there's the tiniest bit of wiggle, but again, that all gets picked up. And yeah, this is just something that you're going to see in thumbsticks no matter what. So yeah, as it relates to stick drift, the famous stick drift, so you wouldn't get stick drift in these like you would in normal potentiometers, but you still are having the risk of stick drift because if the spring does get loose, you are going to get that little bit of drift in the tiniest little dead zones, and then you'll have to up the inner dead zones. Again, this is technically stick drift proof, but I wouldn't say it's stick wobble proof. There's a bit of a difference. Anyways, out the box, no wobble, feels really good, 0 dead zone on Apex, very little drift. So yeah, I think this guy's good to go. So another thing with this controller is it just seems to work pretty natively out the box. So I just plug this into my Ally. I actually haven't used this on my Ally, I use it on my main PC. But if I do launch some Steam over here, it's just going to immediately recognize it. Yeah, so you can see over here, it is already working, and you will have to configure it if you're doing any sort of emulation or anything like that. But yeah, it kind of works out the box perfectly fine. All right, so let's take a look at the 8bitdo Ultimate software over here. So as you can see, my controller is recognized. I have the update, which I did when I got the controller, and my profiles. So if we go to profiles over here, it was a little bit confusing at the beginning. So if you make a new profile, it is going to, let's call it test. It's going to show up down here, and you can do all the changes you want in this test. The only way to actually get it to apply to the controller is to actually set it as one of these. So yeah, if I do load to profile 2, it's going to go to profile 2. So you can see that test is applied there. So kind of to start, it goes in this list, and then you apply it to profile there. So it means you could probably have a bunch of different extra profiles here and then apply it to the 3 there. So yeah, let's just go over to test. We'll start fresh. So you can see over here that nothing is mapped. On the back, it goes to N. So one thing is you can actually only map it to other controller inputs. So you can't map it to any sort of keyboard inputs. If I try to view something there, it doesn't map. Even though showing the N makes it seem like it's confusing, it actually just means null. So if I go there, and let's say A, you kind of get the point there. So that's how it would map. And yeah, you can see on my actual one that I've just called default, I've got all my mappings there. All right, so let's go back to test. You can see that macro. This is how you set up, obviously, macros on the controller. I don't use macros. A lot of people do like it, so that's how you would do that. The sticks, it's got a stock dead zone. What was it? I don't know. Looks like 12 maybe, but either way, you can slide it all the way back. Convert the axes. Anyways, you can swap the left and right joystick and swap the D-pad and left joystick. But you can see here, there actually isn't any option to change kind of the circularity. Something more robust like the Fly Digis or the Game Stars, you can do that. But here, you kind of is what it is. You get what you get. Triggers, you got the trigger dead zone. You can swap left trigger and right trigger. We've got the vibration here. You can test the vibration by holding both of these. It vibrates, feels pretty good. And then the RGB. So the RGB, there's a couple different effects. I'll kind of break down how it works. So you can choose between nothing, which is close. There's light tracing, which will just trace where you move. I think this looks really cool. This is super cool. And then you also have the fire ring. And yeah, that's what I have here. It just kind of rotates the color within the ring. This also looks really cool. So the way that it works is basically if you go to tracing RGB and background RGB. So yeah, the words that they use are very strange here to describe what they do, but basically background RGB is going to be the base color. So let's say I want to make the base color blue. Oh, sorry, I got to change profiles to see, but I want to make the base color blue. And then I want to change the kind of foreground RGB. And let's say I want to make it yellow. You can see that I've made the part that moves yellow. So background RGB and foreground. I don't know why they use the word tracing, but that's kind of how I think about it. And it's the same thing with light tracing. So if you want to do tracing RGB, that's the color that it's going to change into when you move an input. So you can see it's changing to purple. It doesn't pick up as purple on the camera necessarily, but yeah, you can see that it's changing. So background RGB is going to be kind of that default state if you're not touching anything. So let's say yellow. And then the tracing RGB is going to be the color that it is when you're moving to that direction. So you can see it's changing to red. And that's basically how the RGB works. Obviously, you can use the hex codes, RGB codes, and you can choose whatever color you like. Then motion, you can see that mapping close means nothing. And then you can choose if you want to emulate the left stick or if you want to emulate the right stick. And then there's an enable method, press once. So the enable button would be, let's say LT. I press it's enabled. And also adjust the sensitivity and the dead zone compensation. So I don't actually use gyro, so I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how all of these affect gameplay. From what I've heard, joystick mapping to gyro isn't the most effective. It's kind of not the native gyro support, but yeah, I did want to kind of go over this for you guys. So yeah, hopefully all you gyro users get a little bit better of an idea of how the gyro does work just based on these settings here. Again, in my comment sections, thanks everybody for commenting in the last video. The support was great. And yeah, it seems like the joystick emulation is not the most robust way to do gyro on this controller. So yeah, if you use gyro, you'll probably know what this means. I personally don't use gyro, but yeah, I just wanted to go through that for you guys. All right, so let's go to the GamepadLA tester. So yeah, it's just going to test the latency here. So let's get started. Let's do a muff stick. See, it's kind of jumping a little bit, but it's generally pretty stable. And we got, yeah, that looks pretty good. This is on wireless mode. So yeah, I would assume on wired, it's a little bit more stable, but yeah, I think a lot of people are buying this for the wireless version, so I did want to go through wireless. So yep, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so this is going to be the joystick tester. So yeah, it's basically what it showed in Gamepad Tester previously. You can see the polling rate's just about 875, so pretty close to 1,000 hertz. It's got a lot of steps in between, so it says 3,000 steps, so that's going to be how many kind of individual movements it makes as it gets from one point to another. So yeah, between 3,000, closer to 3,500, so yeah, it's a lot of steps. It's pretty good. I believe the standard for some of the other controllers, like some of the big one ones, were 2,000. So yeah, that's the resolution of the joystick there. Now we're going to take a look at the stick analyzer. We're going to do it on the right thumbstick. And yeah, that looks pretty on point. All right, so some of you guys did want me to test this out on Android. So I've got this set to the Bluetooth switch on the back. And then I just hit the home button, and you can see if I go over here, it is right there to be paired. So I'm going to pair that. We'll go through the process together. Said something about an app needing to be used, but yeah. Okay, so I'm already in, and yeah, it seems to work really, yeah, as expected. All the control kind of maps. Let's see. All right, so as you can see here, yeah, it just automatically worked. Didn't even type anything, even the speed up part works. Yeah, so everything just kind of maps automatically. You don't need to really, yeah, just works. All right, so some final thoughts and recommendations here. So I'm going to kind of take a three-pronged approach. So I'm going to say, when should you get this controller? When should you get the 2C? Or when should you get another controller? So if you're looking for something pretty cheap, but still really great, and you're fine with only having 2 shoulder buttons, you don't need the trigger stops, and you don't need the extra back buttons, I would say go for the 2C. If you're looking for some extra inputs, and you're looking for that nice charging dock, you're looking for the trigger stops and some extra buttons, I would say go with this one over here. It's a really great all-arounder. You really can't go wrong. But if you're looking for something with a little bit more customization, a little bit better of a software suite, maybe you have bigger hands and you prefer the Xbox shape, I'd go for more of something like a Big One offering, or even the Cyclone 2. But just to add something onto that, Gamester is going to be coming out with their G7 Pro. So that's going to have back buttons, trigger stops, and extra shoulder buttons supposedly. So if you're looking for a new FPS controller and don't need it immediately, honestly, I would hold off for that. That might be kind of a really great FPS option. If you need something today and only need 2 extra inputs, I would go with the Cyclone 2. But if you really need those 4 extra inputs, I'd go with this. So yeah, just to summarize, you want more inputs, go with this. If you're fine with just 2, I think the Cyclone 2 is a better bet. There's way more customization. But if you're just looking for some great all-arounder and you're not trying to go crazy in FPSs, or maybe even you do play some FPS, you play some ranked, this is still going to get the job done. You're just not going to have the same level of customization as you would with something like a Cyclone 2. Anyways, that's pretty much it for me. Thanks a lot for watching. Let me know if you like this video. Please feel free to like and sub. Just hit 100 subscribers, so that's great. Really appreciate all the support and all the engagement and comments on the last video. That was really awesome. And yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.